Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about scientific tables. We love to teach them at school because it's a way of getting a lot of information together that you can look at, and there's a lot of folklore out there, sort of a story of one mad examiner doing this, and then everyone runs and does a set up in a particular style, and particular people, I suppose, don't get a real overview of it, and so they really, it's a bit of what we call a dog's breakfast. So particular teachers, I suppose, want to be pedantic and ask for certain things, and they get in and freeze the students in a particular way of doing a table, which sort of rewards students with really fine motor skills. And what in general happens is that you get this amazing factor, probably about year 7, year 8, 13, 14, their body grows, the coordination goes for a short while. Especially when they're playing sport or something like that, they come back in and you say, we're going to draw people, we're going to draw a table or work on what a table is. So what I'm going to do is have a general talk about what a table is, what data is, and various things. So a table records measurements and converts those measurements into data. So scientific data has 4 properties. It's got the amount, the error, the unit, and the context. Now, the table is such that the actual positioning on the table gives the actual context of the data. If you also follow up to a context of the data, the actual context coordinate will give you the unit of it, and you have to display the error. Ideally, you have to display the error in it. So the error can be explicit, plus or minus something or other with it, or it can be via the decimal point. So if you put 0.01, it suggests that there's an accuracy of less than that. It's the uncertainty in that last number, or you can actually put that uncertainty up the top. But there's a way of communicating the uncertainty of a number by the number of significant figures shown, or in engineering ways, like 1.0 is different from 1.000. There's an engineering way of doing it. So you've got those 4 components together in the idea of a scientific measurement. And there's a unit, there's conceptual units, and there's other units which are, the concept may not be understood, but there's a procedural way of getting those units. Now, it's perhaps a peculiar way to actually contain data, and the table is a way of managing the context of your information and converting your information into data, and then for your data to have meaning, it requires those components. So of course there's the meaning of the value, but the meaning of the certainty with it, and then the meaning of the units. So there's a big difference between 4 microns and 4 kilometers. To actually say, I think there's a billion in the American units of the old, or everyone nowadays have surrendered to the Americans and have said it's billions. So the idea is that you have a coordinate space, an XY Cartesian space. On a computer, it can be a 3-dimensional space. It can be more to give the actual various contexts. So typically the x-axis will be the amount of trials that you do. So you might repeat the experiment over and over, and the y-axis might be the time, and then when you write a temperature, you can actually, if you write it at a particular position, you go across to read what trial it is and what time it is. So typically that's in your scientific data, and then you may change the actual meaning to be an average of the trials or a computation of the trials as you go down, and as you can actually see the seconds. Now I want to start a few things. Now there's I've seen sort of this thing where if it doesn't have a border on the outside, it's not a table. That may be anathema to people overseas, but it's something which has taken hold in New South Wales, and people make that true by actually awarding marks if you draw a border around the outside of a table. And I still think, I dare say, this is one of these internal truths which are just local, but it may be bigger. There's a few issues about it. One is that the building of the Australians, we'll discuss the Australian standard way of drawing a lab book. So there's sort of not a large scale standard, it's sort of not like a international standard or something like that. It's just a way of doing things which has been a sort of a hodgepodge of the best lab book practices from Japan and Russia. Obviously it's grounded and grown up in Australia because we're here at the bottom of the earth. There's nothing to lose, nothing to learn. We just pick things up as they go along. So I'll describe the Australian standard. I'll describe the sort of the naive thing is where you draw a table with typically a very heavy red pen around the outside of it, and you draw columns and rows, and you actually rule a row after every data point, and you just write higgledy-piggledy in that little box that you've drawn, and if you're naturally neat, it'll look good. If you're not neat, it'll look pretty scraggy, and you'll put a title on top of it. So these are all these variety of things. Now, what actually happens in a in a publication, the use of lines is minimal, and so the use of lines segregate basically. There's only one single line typically which segregates the label of your spatial direction from the actual data. It actually separates the labels. So trial 6 will be above a solid line, and time X will be, say, in the Y direction, and the Y south axis will be down there. And to make sure that you don't mistake trial 6 for a piece of data or 10 seconds for a piece of data, these are things that you have selected and determined from the outside. And so inside those two lines, you will have the actual inside those two lines you'll have the actual the actual data. On the outside will be the information in your conceptual world, which gives you a conceptual position of your data. So what happens is that your data gains context, two-dimensional context between two dimensions, say in this case of trial and time, from the outside. So your number that you write, so you may put 26.8, and it will acquire, that number will acquire certain things. It will acquire a context. Well, it will say if it's in the trial, it'll be trial 1 temperature plus or minus 0.3 3 degrees. So it will require a what it's measuring, its unit. So basically it doesn't really matter what it's measuring or how it's related to. So the temperature will be of a particular thing, so it'll gain context, it'll gain units, it'll gain errors from outside the table, and you can just put the data actually inside the table to describe it. So rather than repeat a long sentence about every piece of data and put it in text, this way is sort of like a halfway house between concept and numbers. It writes down, and it allows you to shorthand put a piece of data in there. Now, I should say at this point in time, when you're actually in here, you can have a comments column, depending on how it's originated, or you can have footnotes, and footnotes are something you should have a lot of in data tables. Now, people insist they should have a title at the top, and in school books they definitely do have a title at the top. In general, a lot of graphs do have titles up the top, but they also have footnotes, or not footnotes, a caption underneath explaining it. So you can actually refer to individual things, and so you might want to have a footnote and saying misread, note, new thermometer used, footnote, and so the footnotes 1, 2, 3, 4 as you write them down as you go ahead. Now let's move a little bit away from the premeditated table that people draw up and then they just pray to God, or pray that everything runs the way that I've been told. Obviously it will if you've copied off a board. Now we get on to the Australian Standard here, and what I want to do is I want you to imagine an A4 book. You open it up and you've got a page on your right hand side, and it's a lined page, and what you're going to do is you're going to rule a margin from the top to the bottom. This is a right hand page. The left hand margin will be the left hand margin. You rule it from top to bottom, roughly 3 centimeters across, and rule it from the very top to the very bottom. You don't stop and start. I just may as well give it to you in terms of it's determined if you rule it right across the page. It's the fastest way of ruling it. You're not putting your pen down and starting at a particular point, although it can look rather interesting. Now you'll have the top of your page will be your exercise book, which is fat and rolled. The top of the page will have a large 2-3 centimeter line blank space. Then it'll have the top line, so you rule another red line, generally red line, from the left to the right across there. Skip 2 lines and you'll rule another line from the left to right. Then, further up, say if you're taking information for forensics or for a formal research situation, you'd go to the bottom line and rule a line underneath that to allow people to sign off underneath the page and stop people adding to the page. Now, you've created several regions of the page, and they're used in different times. So your column gives you it's sort of like a meta table for a generic page. Your column gives you your column off to the left. There gives you context. So in the very top square, so 3 lines and the horizontal line above it, that little top square, which is siphoned off to the left. I just reached the end of this walk and turning back home. I can say, look, in terms of cardiac rehab, it's just a sudden improvement in airflow. It just sort of like this. So I've got this huge pipe in my throat rather than this thinner one. I don't quite understand how the heart affects that, but let's get back to it as I walk back, and hopefully I'll finish this by the time I get back home. So in that top square, you want the context within the lab book, and it's your page number. It's pretty much important that you do have page numbers and you don't rip out pages. Ripping out pages and using whiteout is a no-no in the world of lab books, and you should also make sure that people understand it's first-hand data that you've actually read from a machine, or you've copied off someone else. You say this is copied off someone else. So if you get an inconsistency, an error, you can work out who you copied it off and actually check their book to see what was going on. It's all part of authorization. So you've got the page number, so your page will go 1 to 100 as you go down. Lab book 1, lab book 3 of such and such date. Name, well, depending on how you want to do it. So name, book 3 of 2018 of such and such a subject. So you get it all really tagged down and bolted down. And so this format is, you then go down and you then have another box, which is those 2 lines, and the margin give you a little box. In that box, again, in the idea of context, page number 6, written on such a date. And then as you're taking down notes, you got things in the column there. You can put, item 1, item 2, item 3, or which is best. I think I picked this up from Russians who are really good, and you sort of read stories about it, but putting the time, so people will say, what is the time, and they will dutifully write it down, so you get the time context, time stamping. And again, this is a really basic thing. If you're taking minutes at a meeting, you want to take the time to get across, so you can see later on if someone's come in and deleted minutes or added something in. They added an extra paragraph in to your minutes, and they have to fill around it. So it's a basic timestamp, more from also data as well. And in that, so as you write notes for that particular day, you tend to write the time at which things were going, or incidental little notes which may affect things, or the temperature or other things in that side column. And in general, when you're taking notes in general, you'll have the overall page. I was trying to think of there's a method of taking note taking where you divide the page in 3 later on, and you put the information. It's folded. It's a Harvard method. Rip my teeth out trying to think of it. But there's this thing is for teaching. So your general message, and I should give you. I have to thank. I still remember the person who taught me all these drafting techniques, Andrea Bunting at Adelaide University. I had to machine up a vacuum system, and I went to the Australian standards, went over to mechanical engineering, and say, teach me everything. But it's actually fairly simple. Now, the critical thing in when you're drafting anything, so we'll get onto tables really quickly, but if you're doing a picture of something, the important thing is to do a very fairy-like hand sketch, ever so fairy-like. Then you come over and draw your beaker and various things using the minimum number of lines possible and a ruler. So what happens is that you can use your fairy sketch and basically run your ruler from left to right, and then top to bottom, and your apparatus will be drawn as if by magic, if you know how to do it. And then you come in and just do little curves as required. Takes a little bit. One of the things I like, and I've lost it, is these beautiful little rulers with a roller underneath it, and so just put it on and it just rolls from left to right. Very beautiful in producing it. And then you label everything, not with full name, like beaker of 65. I think it will be A, and then you have a legend down for the actual items, and you have a label of what it is. Now that's for a beaker or something, some such. And the important thing is that you can then, in your writing up, refer to beaker in brackets A, and they look up to the diagram, and it's just basically standard lab practice. So what you produce is recognisable by patent lawyers. You start to write things as they appear in a patent. So you may as well, if you're going to patent things, you may as well start working as if everything can be patented, and it means that your description is much more precise and concise. So the beaker A, so 500ml beaker A, beaker in brackets A is stirred with rod D and measured with thermometer E, and they'll be labelled like that in the diagram. There's a lot more to cover with pencils, and again there's an importance between the line actually touching the equipment or going very close to the point that you're talking about, or through it. So we'll go through the equipment to actually point the contents of the test tube to the edge, but not touching the test tube, because once it actually line intersects or touches the boundary of something, it becomes actually part of the equipment. It's one of those things, and there has been a gain there that all lines are rules. Lines are you must label with a rule line, and the labelling must be, the lines must be horizontal. Now, again, going from clarity in the Australian drafting standard, that's actually not required, and in actual fact the requirement for a label line has got to be significantly different from a machine line, and so there's a classic curved extended lazy S line which connects parts in, so that allows you to actually have a lot of labels really close, and you're not sort of clustering around. And this is the lazy S there. And that's your standard piece of data, and so you will have the title for that lesson, or that experiment that you're doing. Now, if you come across another page, you don't have to rewrite the title. So if it's blank, it's the assumption that the title has been carried forth, and then when the lesson is finished for that day, you rule a line across the page more, or you can have some notes or various things, and then again there's a referencing for homework and various things, and you can actually reference your own book or other people's books. This technique. Now, here we go for how you do a table, because what happens is that you, and not that I've been in a competitive situation, but I've been in a situation where I've done one BSc, and I was sent back to do a second BSc, not because I was naughty, but because the actual going into teaching, they couldn't understand the fact that I had a PhD. They became very confused and said, "Look, can I do a second BSc? The paperwork says you've got to do a second BSc," and so they funded me to do a second BSc, and I was went back to the lab's 40 something or other. I don't know how old, 10 years, 12 years ago. It's pretty old, and competing with all these young bright sparks, sometimes a bit faster, but having been trained to actually rule up equipment and pages and take data quickly, I could actually just walk in and do the experiment and be packing up, and while other people were unpacking or getting going. Not that I was a competition or anything, and you still get stung by people who, you can never please anyone. So even a professional, there's just a comment that if someone's instructing you, they'll pick up anything. Not that I can quite remember what happened all those years ago, but the important thing is that you've ruled up, you're ready to go, and you got your blank page to, as we call, I don't know, called the Australian Standard. These are the two cross lines, the vertical line down, producing here, you've got the gap there. Now, what you do while you have two lines is that you're ready to start up labelling your table. So what you can do is that you can have, say, time, and underneath the time, centred underneath the time, in brackets is the unit, SI unit, seconds, speed, in brackets, meters per second, and then after that you might actually have an error associated with it, a percentage error, not outside the brackets. So by definition, even in publication, look, I'm feeling fantastic now. I can't believe it. Okay, even in publications, this is the way it's done. So you're mimicking publications of halfway between a publication, halfway between a school book, sort of slightly moving away from actually having to put a line around the outside of this, or using the edge of the paper as a line. So it's meters per second, and in general you use it, and you can have trial 1, trial 2, trial 3 written above it. And then above that, in the blank space, in that 3 lines at the very top of the page, you can write the title of the table. You can tend to write the title of the table later on, and you can write the word table, but sometimes it's pretty self-evident that it is a table. And then you, underneath the S, the unit, you draw a very faint fairy line, and this is something I put Hideo. Hi Hideo, in Japan, if you're out there, you could well be out there. I knew him in Canada. So this is drawing a line down your page, and that's a secret line which we'll tell you a bit later on. Then you draw another faint line which divides the units and columns down, and so what you start off with is the convention is you start with your dependent variable, and then after that you put you start off with your independent variable, the variable that you change, and then in your left handmost column, and that stretches across. Now there's a convention for how you indicate what's an independent variable and what's dependent, so bear in mind that your dependent variable is not so much information, so your data is information from the world, and you are outside the perimeter of your table. You've got your concepts which are impinging on the world, and popping out of the world, out of nature, is your data, and your data is located in a two-dimensional space which describes where it is. Now so we've got two sets of lines, a very faint line down through the centre side, and then a slightly heavier line dividing the actual columns. Now what will happen is that your columns will grow in length as you take more and more data, so you don't know the length of your column. That very first fairy line down there is for you to put the decimal points of all your data, and so rather than having your data float left and right and stuff like that, and rather than actually having your coordination and thought when you actually write the data, you can, in general, the best way of writing it, is to put the decimal point first, then put your pen off to the sides, the requisite number. Generally, if it's scientific, it's only one, and then off to the right. And in general, you can actually get a nice precise amount of data. And so, what you can do is write it, and then after you've completed it, there's several things in. You generally have a comment column off to the right, and footnotes. Comment column basically describes the setup of the trial, or if there's any special things. So you may run a trial under one set of conditions, then the next conditions change, and rather than having some really complicated meta table, the actual change you make decisions on the fly what to try next. So when you take a round of data, a set of experiments, you go for several trial runs, and you say, well, so the trial runs, everything is kept the same, but you just repeat it back and forth, and you complete that, and you're finishing it, but it's the same experiment, you're not resetting up the experiment. You may be just fiddling the apparatus. It's a single line left to right of the page. When you complete the entire experiment, there's those double lines, so there's about 0.5 millimetre between them, and that tells you that you've finished it. And then when it's all completed over several pages or one page, you then come in precision with your vertical red lines, which go down. Now, it doesn't go to the very top of the page, it goes to the first for the first red line going so it goes to the first horizontal line down and goes through. Now, depending on what you like, if it's say you may be running 3 trials, trial 1, trial 2, trial 3, it is in general good practice to put a line which has got a little gap, and it actually doesn't fully go down the full, doesn't touch the horizontal lines. There's a bit of gap and it looks really good. Now, in scientific magazines or scientific journals, there's no, if you look at it, journal article after journal article, there's no horizontal lines. So the actual number of lines is actually absolutely minimal. But this is slightly different. This is a lab book, and there's the vertical lines are not as important, but the horizontal lines do have significance in that you do want to rule your data off, because you don't want someone coming over and adding just more data to it. So there's a significance there. There's also there's confusion that you may go back and take more data, and the equipment's exactly the same, or you may do a double line across to say, I've ripped the equipment fully apart and rebuilt it again. You follow the procedure. Now, why you do that is that you're checking for different levels of significance in your data, in your data presented. So by repeating it, you are establishing the internal numerical significance of the data which you're taking, and which is called reliability. However, if you follow the bigger science, say in the Higgs or gravity wave, the question moves away from reliability and moves away from validity and moves to further. And so I've forgotten the name of this. Harry. Who's the associate? Oh, sorry, mate. Someone I've been talking to in Britain. It's written these really fantastic books, but whereas reliability and significance is a word which is not in common use, and it has a definition, and you can actually speak to the definition via the word. There's a much more definitional approach. I can't quite visualize it. I can visualize it, I can't express it. But if you, instead of talking of reliability, you talk about numerical significance. How significant is this data in terms of its repeatability, or its numbers of it, or say is it 2.013, or is it just 2. That's the numerical significance of it. And then the evidential significance does this data, and you can't tell that from the table. But you could tell it slightly by part of the validity is that one aspect of the validity is that you follow a procedure, and the procedure itself produces a repeatable experiment. So there's actually a bit of a continuum of significance between numerical significance and evidential significance. Now, obviously, if something doesn't have numerical significance, it's going to be really struggling to have evidential significance. So really, you can think of it as a sort of a Venn diagram, but encapsulated in each other. So that's numerical significance is a necessary condition to establish first, and then after that you have evidential significance in that the pattern really that you're looking for. There's the word hypothesis, but that's really abused because people tend to get summed up, because people start to think hypothesis is derived from your theory, and therefore you tend to say my hypothesis is based on this reason, and then by adding the reason close to the hypothesis, there's this leakage of evidential confirmation, right? And people have confirmation bias already, but if you set a hypothesis and almost immediately say it may not be in the hypothesis, but in the next sentence it's because this, I hypothesize the hamburger will fall down in this experiment. This is your prediction pattern because of gravity. And what happens is that there's basically in a waterfall, your hamburger drops off, but you're a fish in a waterfall, dropping down due to the motion of the water either side. But because you've said because of gravity in there, this is in a teaching environment, it's sort of like a shortcut to actually just reinforce the learning material that you're going through rather than actually running a genuine experiment. And so what I'm sort of saying is that the actual table craft, if it's taught as a it's in the level of this procedural syntax. That is, the reason we have grammar is for internal consistency, yes, but also communication. So it means that it's like the grammar. It's nothing special. It's like the grammar, and it's the precision of your table can flow into your precision of your term. So there are terms which are perhaps better to use than hypothesis, probably pattern. I will say this in another podcast, sort of recasting the scientific teaching method in terms of the modern, what's happening with gravity waves and the modern big science, and eliminating the mistakes people tend to make. Not so much the students, but the teachers make these dreadful mistakes to prove a principle, and it's a fair cop. You want to show a principle, you want to demonstrate it's part of the communication, but it's not necessarily a full hypothesis experiment in the full view of it. And although it may be a small insignificant error, it's an error nonetheless which gets amplified when the students left to their own devices, and I see actually extra walks marks awarded if you get 1 mark for the hypothesis and 2 marks for a hypothesis with a reason, which really defeats the whole hypothesis concept anyway. But to quote Ned Kelly, when a whole heap of things happened, so Ned Kelly's a famous Australian bushman, eventually got very wronged, got pushed, dressed up in a tin can, got shot, wounded, and he said, such is life. And really, with all these sorts of things, I'm not angry or worried, but such is life. And as I'm recovering, I've just done a very big hill then, so that's a pretty amazing feat. Okay, thanks for listening, and I hope you've got the version of it. And I think I've got a quickie. I might put a quickie animation website up there. I have to remember where it is. Put it up there where you can see in Queeky. So there's thousands of ways to teach doing tables, and of course the drafting and stuff like that goes very well with Queeky. The great thing about Queeky is you've got a forward and reverse button, and so people can go back, the students can go back and forward and see the line moving up and down. And I suppose the other problem with this screen animation where they have the big hand in it, the big hand's there, but the hand distracts people. It looks good. Is that really a hand? Oh no, it's not. Because the entire advantage of computer animation is that you can remove the hand. You can actually focus on just the line, and the line in context. You lose a lot of the context when the actual hand goes over. It looks cool, a bit creepy, and then a bit boring. So you'll get a big, with all these types of things, it's a big, the big price. You get a big bonus when you first use it, and people haven't seen it before. And then the second time, and then the third time, you actually go downhill. So it's one of these things for any teaching technique. It's really got to be run consistently over a time and actually measured before you know how to do it. This is power tunes, that type of stuff. There's a quick draw, I don't know what it is. So I'll try and see if I can get a quickie to go up on this. And I have actually taught for 42 minutes on tables, which would have to be a world record. Okay, thanks a lot. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.